The organization representing Canada's oil and gas drilling sector says it expects more activity in 2023. The Canadian Association of Energy Contractors says it expects an approximately 15% rise in wells drilled in Canada next year from this year. The industry group says it expects a boost next year from the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion and the Coastal GasLink project, both of which will increase Canadian oil and gas capacity. Now, meanwhile, new research from a think tank suggests developing Canadian energy resources and exports could displace the global reliance on Russian energy. A SecondStreet.org analysis says Canada could displace about half of Russia's energy exports over the long term. Well, with us now to discuss the study is Mr. Colin Craig, president of SecondStreet.org. Mr. Craig, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell us what the main findings of your recent report were?
Yeah, so as you noted, a lot of people are concerned with buying Russian oil and natural gas. Of course, that is one of the main funding sources for paying for Vladimir Putin's tanks and rockets that are inflicting pain on the Ukrainian people. So a lot of pundits have said, well, Canada could step up and the world could buy from Canada instead of from Russia. Then you don't have to worry about funding Putin's military. So we've heard that for a long time. We thought, well, let's see how big of a difference Canada could make. And so we asked a number of experts in the oil and gas sector just how much we could increase our output and exports if we made it a priority to build the pipelines that we need to get these resources to countries that are buying from Putin right now. And also if our country made it a priority. So those are some of the considerations they had to make when coming up with their estimates. We then took their estimates, averaged them, and compared them with future export projections for Russia to figure out how much Canada could displace in terms of Russian energy. And as you said, within the decade, we think that Canada could replace about half of Russia's crude oil exports, and a little bit higher for natural gas, about 59%.
Now, that's a major dent in the energy industry, sir. Now, in terms of timeline, when it comes to boosting energy production, we know this report broke projections down into short, medium, and long term projections. So, can you unpack that for our viewers?
Yeah, so in the short term, there's not a lot that we can do. I mean, a lot of people I think will understand you can't build a pipeline overnight. It takes a long time to plan it, go through environmental approvals and so forth, even if you expedite it. So there's not a lot Canada can do within a year. Once you get into that 3 to 5 year range, if we really made it a priority, we could get into closer to around 20% of Russian energy that we could displace. And like I said, by the end of the decade, that's when we start to getting into a major dent in their exports, about half or so. So it can't happen overnight, but I think what people need to remember is that we have a long-term problem now that we need to address. The world simply can't be buying oil and gas from Putin's regime over in the future. It's just simply not responsible to do so.
Another thing to consider here would be environmental concerns. So, how can Canada boost production while also keeping within our environmental commitments?
Yeah, and that's a very good question because that is something that we need to be mindful of. And I think there's two things to consider. And one is right now, a number of countries they're going back to coal power, which is a very dirty form of energy when it comes to emissions. And so, if we actually increased the amount of natural gas that we're exporting, well, countries could use that and actually reduce their emissions by about half because natural gas is far cleaner than using coal. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Number two, governments would receive huge, huge piles of money if we started exporting more of our resources. And they could take some of those dollars to help companies that are working on technology to reduce emissions. So there's a way that we could maybe be a great ethical supplier there where we're using these dollars to figure out ways to reduce emissions overall. And that technology could be exported abroad too. So ultimately, we could help the world reduce emissions while providing the energy that it needs for the future.
Some important points to consider there, Mr. Craig. A quick 30 seconds left here, but what are the next steps for secondstreet.org following this report here?
Well, we're certainly sharing this with elected officials. I mean, at the end of the day, they have a choice if they want to step up, have our country be an ethical supplier, one that's peaceful and using the money from energy sales for good or continue to let the world be dependent on tyrants like Vladimir Putin and other countries which have deplorable human rights track records.
All right, Mr. Craig, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks for your time.